seated.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Memorial Road. Glad you're here this morning. If you are a guest or if it's been a while since you've been here, I just want to say welcome, and we are really thankful that you are here this morning. If you want to know a little bit more about this church family, we've got an event that meets every week, and it's catered towards people that might not know a lot about Memorial Road and that might not know a lot about Churches of Christ. It's called First Cup. And so if you didn't get to go today, hope next week you come back and join us. It happens during our Bible class hour at 9:35. So come back next week and you can learn a little bit more about this church family. Well, I hope you read your chapter from the story this week. We're in the middle of Exodus now, and a lot of different stuff happened in the chapter of the story this week. So a few days ago, I'm at home with my kids, and we're trying to read through the kid version of the story, and we're talking about the Ten Commandments, and we're going over the Ten Commandments with my children, and we get to Commandment 6 or 7, and I've rattled off the first few okay, and then I kind of trail off when I get to Commandment 7, and my oldest says, "Well, Daddy, what is Commandment number 7? I have this moment where I'm like, what do I really do? To be honest, I totally forgot it. I'm trying to channel my Mrs. McBride. It's just not coming. And do I admit that I don't know it? Or what do we do? And so I finally had to admit to Anna, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go get up my Bible and look up the Ten Commandments, even though I'm preaching on it this coming Sunday. So I totally failed. So here's what I want to do to start off our lesson today. If you got a bulletin, I want you to grab it. If you don't have a bulletin, just get a piece of paper. You can do this on your phone. We're going to take the 1-minute Ten Commandment quiz. And so what I want you to do is grab a partner next to you and in 1 minute try to list in order the Ten Commandments. You cannot cheat because you're breaking a commandment if you're cheating. So if you want fire to come from heaven, don't do that. All right, you've got 1 minute. Ready, set, go. You got 30 seconds. Okay, you're down to your final 15. So if you're only on commandment number 3, you're not doing well. Got 5. Okay, time. All right, let's see how we did. We're going to grade our answers together. I made the mistake in first service of just assuming that I still remembered all 10, and I didn't write them down, and so I again got to commandment number 7, and I forgot, but I pretended like I didn't forget, and so I just asked the audience to tell me what it was, and luckily David North on the front pew, and his voice really projects, and so I looked better. But I wrote them down this time so I wouldn't forget. All right. Commandment number 1, no other. Commandment 2, no idols, images. Commandment number 3, don't use God's name in vain. Commandment 4, remember the. Commandment 5, honor your. Good. Commandment 6, don't kill. 7, no adultery. 8, don't steal. 9, don't lie. The whole false testimony against your neighbor. And then number 10, last one, don't covet. Okay, very good. Now, how many people got all 10 right in the correct order? 1, 2, 3 in the back. Way to go. Very good. Yeah, this is about the same numbers in first service. So we're really, really bad at this. But that just means we have a lot of room to grow. And I like being at a church that has a lot of room to grow. Well, the Ten Commandments, they have had an enormous effect on the history of this country. In fact, in 1983, a U.S. district court said this at the end of one of their court cases. The Ten Commandments have had an immeasurable effect on Anglo-American legal development. Back in 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court said this: "It is equally undeniable that the Ten Commandments have had a significant impact on the development of secular legal codes of the Western world." So it's no doubt that in our country, the Ten Commandments have had an effect on our society. What I want to know this morning is, let's say that you were talking to somebody that didn't know anything about Christianity. You met them, they'd never read their Bible. They said, "Hey, can I have a Bible study with you?" And you said, "Hey, I'd be happy to study the Bible with you." You sit down at Starbucks and they open up their Bible, and it just happens to fall right at Exodus 20. And they point at Exodus 20, and the subtitle reads Ten Commandments, and they say, "Oh, I have heard about these. Do I need to follow these in order to be a good Christian?" What would you say to that person? And more importantly, whatever your answer is, how would you defend it? Why would you say yes or no to that question? You see, some people would say, "Oh, no. You turn to the Old Testament. Actually, let's flip over to the New Testament, because there was this guy that Jesus, and he came around, and he really summarized the whole Old Testament, and he said that he was the fulfillment of all the law, and he said that you really don't need to follow those laws or any of the other laws, because he really just gave us 2 commandments, and as long as you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and as long as you love your neighbor as yourself, then you really don't need to think about those 10 commandments. They're kind of irrelevant. They meant something to Israel, but they really don't mean anything to you." That might be what you say to that person. Others of you might look at the 10 Commandments, and when the person asks the question, you would say, "Absolutely yes." You look at the last 40, 50, however many years of the morality of this country, and you would say the reason that there's so much immorality and the reason that there's so many things that happen against God is because people have fallen away from these principles and these truths. So if any of us have any hope or want any hope of coming back into right relationship with God, we've got to start obeying these rules again. So in the first answer, the first view of the 10 Commandments, they're basically irrelevant because of Jesus. But in the second view of the 10 Commandments, they are mandatory because you need to obey them in order to get that favor that you want from God. Now, I would suggest to you that both views, either that the 10 Commandments are irrelevant and that the 10 Commandments are mandatory to earn some special favor with God, I don't think either one of those views comes to light when you read the story of the 10 Commandments as it plays out within the story of Scripture. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to try to put the 10 Commandments in their own context in the book of Exodus. If you've been with us the last 4 or 5 weeks, we're studying the story, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and we're trying to see the stories that take place as they relate to the larger narrative of what God has been doing with mankind and what God has been doing with the people of God. So the story thus far goes something like this. God creates a beautiful world. Sin comes in and begins to destroy that beautiful world. God comes up with this plan to redeem this broken world, and as part of his plan is taking place, he brings up a people to call his own. Abraham is the patriarch of this people, and he looks at these people and he says, "I'm going to bless you, but you're going to go bless the world. You're going to be part of the solution to redeeming the world and eradicating evil from it." Well, the first problem with this group of people is that they find themselves, they're not a nation. In fact, they're in slavery to another world power. And so you saw last week when Andy was preaching that through the sovereignty of God, God brings this people who is in slavery out of slavery. And now they're sitting at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to the top of the mountain to get the commands of God to bring back to the people. And so we pick up in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. "And God spoke all these words." That's the way that this chapter starts in Exodus chapter 20. Now, before we even go on from there, think about this. God has never spoken to the nation as a whole. Spoken to Moses. Moses knows God. But the people of Israel, they don't have a whole faith background. They don't know a lot about their Bibles. I'm assuming that any of you who grew up in any Christian homes, some of your earliest memories are going to be from church or VBS, and maybe your first memory of God is, Jesus loves me, this I know. Now, think about these people. Their first view of God came from the plagues. So somewhere in Egypt, you've got this 12-year-old boy who's saying, hey, Mom, there's a frog in the bathroom. And the mom said, oh, yeah, that's Yahweh. Hey, Mom, there's blood in the bathtub. Oh, yeah, that's God. Mom, our cow just died. Yeah, that's God too. Okay, so these people, their first view of God is not this wonderful God that you and I know as coming up in church. Their first view of God's terrifying. They don't know this God the way that you and I know him. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, that was 400 years ago. Abraham is just about as real to the Israelites as George Washington is to you. And so they don't really understand all of these things. And so when God's about to speak, they're like, whoa, this is the God who just got us out of Egypt. What in the world is that God? What's his very first message, the very first message, going to be to us as his people? So here's what God says. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You see, this is so important that you read the Ten Commandments in their context, because when you really just pick up your Bible and go to Exodus chapter 20, what you will figure out is that the Ten Commandments don't start with a commandment. They don't start with the rule. The first part of Exodus 20 does not say, here's what you should do. The very first line says, here's what God already did. And this is really, really significant, because what we find is that the Ten Commandments are given to a people already redeemed, not so that they can earn their redemption. We often get this one backwards. Like, think about how the story does not go. People are in slavery, making bricks without straw. They're oppressed by their Egyptian lords, and God comes down and says, hey, I'll cut a deal with you guys. If you can honor your parents, try not to lie, try not to covet very much, don't make any idols. If you can do all 10 of these commandments, then I'll come down and get you out of Egypt. That's not how the story goes. In fact, when God comes down into Egypt and rescues these people with spectacular miracles and completely devastates the most powerful nation in the world, what exactly did Israel do to help God out? Israel did just as much to help get out of their own slavery as you do to get out of the slavery of sin. You see, what you learn from the Ten Commandments when you read them in their context is that grace precedes obedience. See, we always get that backwards. We assume that I obey first, and if I obey the right rules with the right timing, and I get it all right the first time, then somehow my obedience is going to one day earn my grace. That's not the way the biblical story works. God comes down and offers the people salvation from their slavery long before they lift one finger to do anything in the name of the Lord. Now, this begs the question, why exactly do you obey God? What's your motivation behind your obedience? I've always been a big follower of that fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. But my motivation behind that commandment has changed over the years. When I was a kid, the reason that I obeyed my mom and dad was because I had to obey my mom and dad. If I didn't obey my mom and dad, I'm going to get a SWAT, I'm going to get timeout, I'm going to get grounded. And so it's not that I really wanted to obey their rules, clean your room, do your homework, get back by curfew. I didn't want to do those things, but because I knew the punishment was coming, I felt like I had to do them. Or obligation. I was doing them out of obligation. You know what this looks like in your life. This is why you pay your taxes. This is why you try to drive the speed limit. It's not necessarily that you want to do those things. It's because you feel like you have to do those things. Now, what can happen is this obedience from obligation, it can start to seep over into our life with God. And it can start to be the reason why we do the things we do spiritually. And so we might think, well, I guess I have to get out of bed and come to church today again because God's happy when I come to church, and haven't prayed in a week, I guess I should pray because that's what I'm supposed to do. And over and over and over, we take things that are good things and we put them in the have to category, and we obey them out of obligation. Now, the question I have is how does that work out in the long run? How long can you go obeying God out of obligation before you decide that, you know what, I'm just not going to do it anymore? What does have-to Christianity have to offer people in the long run? I'll tell you how it works on mission trips I used to lead with teenagers. I remember, I have a lot of memories of, we'll be in a hotel somewhere doing a mission trip, Mexico, Albuquerque, somewhere, and all the students are getting ready to go, and we're taking roll, and like, it's always like one kid that's still in his bed. And so I have to walk up there, knock on his door, go in, say, hey, get up, we're about to go build houses, we're about to go to VBS for kids, we're about to do work in the name of God. And they roll over and pull their hair out of their face, and you can guess what they say. Do I have to? Have to Christianity, it doesn't get you very far. I mean, the only way that I got kids out of bed was to say, yes, there's donuts for breakfast, and yes, there's pizza for lunch, so get out of bed. That was what motivated them to get out of bed, is food. Just flat out, they're hungry. Most people, at least for the long term, are not motivated by, oh, I have to do this, I'm obligated to do this. It works in the short term, but it doesn't necessarily work in the long term. Now, let me tell you about how my relationship with my parents has evolved. I am still a big believer in the fourth commandment. I still honor my father and mother, but I do it for a different reason. I don't do it for the same reason that I did back when I was a kid. Did I say fourth commandment? I meant fifth commandment. See, everyone messes up. Everyone messes up. Fifth commandment. I am a big believer in the fourth commandment. That's a different sermon. We are overworked people. Fifth commandment, still a big believer in it. I don't obey my parents anymore because I have to. If I wanted to rebel against them and disobey them, I'm a grown man. I could do that if I wanted to, but I don't. And the reason that I do not rebel against my parents, the reason that I still honor them and that I still obey them is very simple. It's because I remember what they did. I obey out of a sense of gratitude. And this gratitude has increased heavily in the last several years now that I have kids. Because I find myself asking my parents, you know, my kids are like throwing fits and they cry at night and they do crazy things. I never did that, right? Did I? And they remind me that I was a kid one day, and they endured my tantrums, and they changed my diapers, and they got me through really rough years. And so the reason that I obey them and the reason that I honor them is because I'm grateful for what they did in my past. And so if you find yourself really struggling to obey God, perhaps what you need to do is not try harder to obey rules, but instead to look back at what God already did. You see, the greatest motivation to live your life in the name of Jesus is a motivation of gratitude because of what God has already done. You find this same theme playing out all throughout the book of Exodus and even Deuteronomy. Exodus 22, verse 21. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner. Why? Because I said so. No, it's because you used to be foreigners in Egypt. Remember where you came from. That's why you're doing it. Exodus 23, same rule. Do not oppress a foreigner. Why? Well, it's a rule. You need to obey my rules. No, that's not what it says. Here's why you do that. You yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners. Deuteronomy 5:15, therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Why? Why would we keep the Sabbath day? There's work to be done. The reason you do it is, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there. So over and over and over, what you find is the greatest motivation to live life for God is not that you're just going to make a big effort, and it's not that you're going to do things because you have to, but when you can learn to do things for God because you're grateful for what He did, then what you'll find is it's not that you have to do these things, you're going to start wanting to do these things because you're so grateful for what God has done in your life. Now, when you can get to this point where you start obeying God out of gratitude, then what happens, at least what I believe, is that you'll start to see why God even wanted you to obey in the first place. Think about this. Why would God want His people to obey? Exodus 19 gives us a really, really significant clue here. Exodus 19, verse 5, this is just before they go up the mountain. And the Bible says this, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then verse 6 is so important, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Okay, let's think about this. Why is God saying this whole bit about you're going to become a kingdom of priests? See, what was the role of a priest back in the Old Testament? A priest was the one who would stand in the middle between the wicked, sinful people and God. And so when the wicked, sinful people sinned, the priest would sacrifice for the people to God. And so they were this bridge, they were this mediator between a sinful world and God. And so what God is telling us is he's saying, if you can obey my laws, if you can obey what I'm telling you to do, then what's going to happen is you are going to start becoming this kingdom of priests, and the world is going to start seeing me because of the way that you will obey. I mean, think about this. The results of obedience. Many of us would say that the result of me obeying God is forgiveness. And if you really take that to its farthest extent, what you're really saying is, if I can obey my parents, and if I cannot lie, and if I won't cheat, and if I won't use the Lord's name in vain, then somehow, some way, I will go about earning that forgiveness. That's not the point of obedience. The point of obedience is actually not forgiveness, it's witness. The reason that God is saying, I want you to live by this code, by this social order, is that if you can live this way with no other God except me, and with no idols, and treating people with dignity, if you can live that way, then what's going to happen is you will become the people that ends up blessing the world and fulfills the promise and the challenge that I gave you all the way back in Genesis 12 to Abraham. That's how you become the blessing. In other words, you might think about it this way. Start with the end result. If you were to paint a picture in your mind of the type of church that you would hope Memorial Road would become, what kind of a picture would that be? You might say, well, I would hope that Memorial Road would become a kind of a city on a hill to this community. I would hope we'd become this place where we make a difference in our neighborhoods. I would hope we'd become the type of church where if people had a problem, they knew they could come to Memorial Road. We're the city on the hill. We're the salt of the earth. We're the light of the world. Now, if we ever hope to become that type of people, then guess what we're going to start doing? We're going to start treating each other with dignity. We're not going to covet. We're going to use the name of God with honor. We're not going to make idols. We're going to honor our parents. We're going to live by that code, because when we live by that code, the world starts to see who we are. That's what it means to be a kingdom of priests. And so you can almost think of Exodus 20 in parallel to Genesis chapter 1. So in Genesis chapter 1, what God is doing is he's saying, I can create a physical world out of physical chaos. So I'm going to create light, and I'm going to distinguish it from darkness. I'm going to create land and sea and space and animals and trees, and I'm going to create this whole world of order, physical order, out of physical chaos. You get to Exodus 20, and one of the things that God is doing here is he's saying, my creativity wasn't just designed for physical creation, my creativity is also designed for the social world. And so the Yahweh, the God, the creator God who built the physical world in Genesis 1 is now saying, look at the type of social order I will create with my people. And so it's the creative nature of God coming out in the Ten Commandments saying, if you want to live by my laws, this is the type of people that you are going to become. And so back to my very first question at the beginning of the lesson, what would you say to that new seeker that's trying to figure out what's the big deal with the Ten Commandments? This question of, should we follow the Ten Commandments? The answer is yes. We should follow the Ten Commandments, but we're not doing it to earn grace. We're doing it to share grace. I don't follow the Ten Commandments so that God gives me some special favor as if I'm better than someone who does not follow the Ten Commandments, but I do follow the Ten Commandments very diligently because I know that if I follow them, I'm helping create the type of world that will be the witness to the broken world in which we live. So the answer to the question really is yes. You know what I wonder about these people sitting at at the foot of Mount Sinai, and they're faced with this big ethical decision once you get to Exodus 32. Are we going to have faith in this God who we haven't seen in a while? Or are we going to build ourselves this golden calf? And they're sitting at this great moment of an ethical decision. And you know what this feels. You've sat at the moment where you had to decide which of these two ethical choices am I going to make. And I'm wondering, as they're sitting there at the foot of Mount Sinai, wondering what to do, I wonder if just one person in the whole group of people just would have reached their hand back and felt on their own back. And if they would have just remembered their own scars, put there by the lacerations of their captors, I wonder if they would have made a different decision. I wonder if one person just would have remembered back to all the thousands of funerals that they had for the baby boys that the Egyptians killed, and that God came down and took those Egyptians down. I wonder if they just would have remembered that, if they would have made a different decision. I wonder if just a few of them could have remembered back to standing on the Red Sea after they had passed through it and looking back at these waters, which are now tainted pink with the blood of the people that God has just taken down in order to provide this freedom for the people of God. If they just would have remembered what God had done, I'm wondering if they would have made a different decision in the moment. See, I believe that their sinfulness came from this lack of gratitude. See, some of you this morning, you are faced today with this ethical decision, and you're wondering, even as you sit in church today, you're thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe you're thinking, maybe I should leave my spouse. I'd be happier if I left her, but I know I probably shouldn't. Should I do that? Some of you are sitting in the middle of a sexual ethical decision, and you're wondering, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I look at this? Should I not look at this? I don't know what to do. Some of you are sitting with ethical financial decisions at work. You might be thinking, should I take this money or should I not? Some of you, maybe you're sitting with an ethical decision of you have something that you want to say to somebody else that you're mad at. Text message or an email, and you're ready to send it out, but you know that it's going to be hurtful, and so you're sitting at this crossroads of decision, and you're wondering, what in the world should I do? If you're sitting there, what I would suggest to you is look backwards first, and you remember Jesus Christ on that cross and the blood that came down for you, and you make your ethical decision based on your gratitude for what Jesus Christ did for you. Imagine if all your ethics came through the filter of the cross, the type of people and the type of person that you would become. My guess is you'd be radically different than if you didn't look back with gratitude. Some of you today, it's not that you're in the middle of an ethical decision, but you're in the middle of you just feel like Christianity is a burden. You didn't want to get up this morning and come to church. You're sitting here through another sermon and you're thinking, man, how many more times do I have to sit here and listen to Phil preach? How many more times do I have to just come to church just to be here? How many times do I have to pray and read my Bible? And you're sitting in the middle of have-to Christianity. If that's you, again, what I would recommend is looking back at what God did for you. See, when you can remember the gravity of what happened on the cross, I promise you, it's going to change the way that you're living today. You see, so many of us, when we think back to the cross, we get it backwards. We look back to the cross, and we imagine the story going something like this. God coming down and saying, hey, Phil, I know you've got some sin in your life, but I've got a great deal for you. I've written out these 10 rules, and if you can just manage to not lie for a little while, try not to covet anymore, and if you'll just honor your parents and try to stop doing the whole idol thing, if you can just do that for 2 years, then guess what? I'll send my son down for you. And if you can just manage to keep these rules, I'll send my own son for your life, and he'll make up for all the sins that you committed. Some of us live with that order. That's not the order of the Bible. See, if you spend the rest of your life keeping the 10 Commandments, and you keep every single one for the rest of your life until the day that you die, then you stand just as much a chance at salvation as Adolf Hitler. Keeping the commandments does nothing as far as earning your salvation. You've already got it. And so what happens is so many of us, we're trying to work on a project that's already been finished. It's already done. And so if you spend every waking hour trying to work on a project that God already finished 2,000 years ago, think about how much you're not getting to do with your life that's constructive in building towards a better kingdom. In 1990, The year 1900, there was an art professor in Spain. And he was really well known. He had painted lots and lots of different images for lots of different people. His name was Elias Garcias Martinez. And he was a Christian. And when he wasn't teaching his art class, he would travel to various villages throughout Spain to support them and just to do mission work and to teach a little bit. Well, one particular village he developed a really strong relationship with. It was in Borja, Spain. And every single year he would go to this little village and he would teach, he would give them money, and he built this really healthy relationship with this church there. Well, one year he decided that he was going to give them a gift, and so he spent months coming up with this really incredible painting that he ended up giving this church. You can put this first picture on the screen. It was called Ecce Homo, and it was from the Gospel of John. It was when Pilate presented Jesus to the people, and he said, "Behold the man." That's what Ecce Homo means. And so he painted this picture of Jesus, and it became one of the more popular and famous paintings of Jesus in the modern era. Well, about 100 years later, this was just 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lady who went to this church. She was in her 80s, and she would look at this picture every day, and she just didn't think the painting was good enough. She started to see that if she looked really close, some of the little dots of paint were fading just a little bit. And so she thought, I could probably just touch it up just a hair. And so she didn't have any training in art, any training in painting, but she got her paintbrushes out, and she decided that she was going to make this picture better. And this is what happened after several weeks. You can put this second picture up here. That's what happened. These pictures went on the internet. People caught wind of this story, and oh, wow, you talk about people getting upset. I mean, this woman was blasted for what she did. I mean, everybody started making fun of it. The picture on the left, Ecce Homo, behold the man. People started calling this Ecce Mono, which means behold the monkey. Like that's the extent to which people started making fun of this. Everybody got in the game. Star Wars fans got in on the game, and they said, finally, someone has made an Ewok Jesus. We've been waiting for this for years and years and years, and finally we have Ewok Jesus. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is, it doesn't do a lot of good to work on a project that's already done. If it's already finished, why in the world would you spend your time working on something that was pretty good to begin with? And so some of us with our lives, what we're doing, when you spend your life trying to earn your own salvation, when you spend your life trying to forgive yourself of all these sins that God's already forgiven, it's almost like you're taking a hammer and a nail and you're trying to build on a room to the Taj Mahal. Okay, it's already there, it's amazing, and it doesn't need your work to get any better. It's already done. See, I'm not sure why so many of us think that we need to really work hard to earn our salvation. Maybe it has to do with the technology of the day. It doesn't matter what phone comes out, what car comes out, what computer comes out. You know that a year later, there's going to be one that's bigger or sleeker or faster, or just better. And so maybe for some of us, we think that, well, maybe I can just add a little bit to it. Let me tell you something. If there's anything in the world that can't get bigger, better, faster, sleeker, it's the forgiveness of your sins. And so if you are spending all your waking moments trying to earn it and trying to figure out how to get rid of all that guilt and shame in your past, you need to know this morning that that's what Jesus did on the cross. He did that work. And so Satan loves it. Satan loves it when you can spend your life working on a project that God's already finished. Because what that means, if you spend your waking hours working on a project that God's already finished, then guess what? You're not working on the project that's not finished. You see, the great project of God that is not finished yet is the restoration of the broken world. It's the eradication of evil. It's uplifting the places where brokenness exists. It's taking justice to places where there is injustice. And it's all over the world. It's all over the city. It's all over our neighborhoods. And so every day that you spend working to earn your own salvation is a day that you do not get to spend becoming this person that lives the kingdom of God here and now. Every day you spend working on a project that's already finished is a day that you're not spending working on a project that's not finished. And that's why Jesus is calling us to be this kingdom of people that let him do his job. It's already over. And if you let Jesus do his job, then you're much more likely to do your job, which is to get out in the community and make it a better place. Genesis chapter 12. You see, if God wanted you to become the type of person that followed all of these rules to earn your salvation, and he wanted you to make everybody else follow the same rules to earn their salvation, then he would have called you to be a kingdom of Pharisees. Because that's what Pharisees did. They followed all these rules and put burdens on other people that they weren't willing to lift. But God did not call us to be a kingdom of Pharisees. He called us to be a kingdom of priests. And our mission to the world is to stand in the gap between the sovereignty and the holiness of God and the wickedness of the world, and not to turn our back on the world, but to say, you know what? My sins have been forgiven, and therefore I'm going to go to bat for the wicked world in which I live. That's what it means to be a kingdom of priests. And so some of you this morning, you walked in and you were full of guilt. Remember to look back at the cross. Jesus already took care of that. Some of you this morning, you've never encountered the grace of Jesus Christ. Remember back to the Exodus? Last thing I'll say. God does the 10 plagues. People don't have any part in it. They're not the ones bringing the blood down. They're not the ones bringing the frogs in or the gnats. But on the 10th plague, when the death angel goes over Egypt and takes the firstborn of all the Egyptians, the one thing that the people of God do to accept grace is they position themselves under the blood of an innocent lamb. And when they position themselves under the blood of the innocent lamb, that's where they find the grace of God. Some of you this morning have never placed yourselves under the blood of the innocent lamb, Jesus Christ, through the waters of baptism. If that's what you want to do this morning, we want to help you do that. If there's any way that we can be a blessing to you, why don't you come while we stand and sing?